InFi, episode 30.
Welcome to InFi, the future of finance, hosted by American economist and author Dr. Robert Murphy. Each week, tune in for dynamic discussions with business pioneers about emerging trends in finance, life insurance, asset management, technology, and more. Now, let's talk the future of finance.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the InFi podcast. Today I'm going to be speaking with Zuhayr Rashid, who is the Chief Technology Officer here at infineo. So Zuhair has been on before to talk about AI. Today he's going to be talking about the context behind and then the actual events of a recent news story involving BlackRock. And it was something that was a little bit saucy that happened. And it involves their new fund that is on a public blockchain. All right, so I won't get into more specifics because we're going to unpack it all in the episode itself. But that's the context. It dovetails with what we're working on here at infineo. So that's why it was of particular interest to the listeners of this podcast. And so I thought, who better to have on than Zuhair, who is busy at work building our product set that's going to be on a blockchain. And in particular, we're going to see why we here at infineo are not using a public blockchain for what we're doing. So that's the point of this episode, is to explain the distinction between various types of blockchains and why some might be more suitable for financial applications than others. Without further ado, here is my discussion with infineo's CTO, coming to you straight from Dubai, Zuhair Rashid. Zuhair, welcome to the InFi podcast.
Glad to be back, Bob.
Well, I was going to say back, but then I think it may have still been Founders Forum when you were.
Sure.
And so it's the Phoenix podcast that has been reborn. So as people, this as well, I would have said in the intro, but yes, you are Chief Technology Officer here at infineo. And there was a recent news story that was somewhat whimsical, a little bit funny perhaps even, but having to do with using blockchain technology in the financial sector. And it actually has some relevance to some of the decisions we've had to make here at infineo. And so I thought it would be fun to have you come on and, we'll start with that. So it has to do with BlackRock. So you can, for the listeners who don't know the context, you kind of just explain what has BlackRock been doing. And then you can talk about the jokers and those whimsical games they play.
Yeah, sure. Sounds good. So I think, as the viewers may or may not know, the sort of pace of the blockchain space it comes and goes in waves in terms of excitement around new things and things like that, and the market cycles as well sort of align. So more recently, there's been sort of what you call a bull market in crypto for the last, say, 6 months or so, maybe. And so there's a lot of institutions and others clamoring to sort of show themselves as tech forward and adopting the blockchain, whereas a year or two ago, it may have been a bad word in institutional circles and others. And so,
can I stop you? Is that just because of FTX is what gave it a bad name, and now is it the ETFs that are? If you had to point to two specific things,
if you want to, basically you can sort of characterize the cycles downstream of big events like that, right? So, for example, the ETF may be the pinnacle of a bull market or the kickoff of a bull market, whereas FTX and others like it, like the lending platforms that went bust and others like those might have been emblematic of the bear market. And then during the times when these things are happening, the sentiment shifts wildly from one side to the other. And so when it comes to, I guess, corporate positioning and just institutional signaling, there's obviously that follows on from public sentiment to some degree. And so institutions, I think, during the FTX debacle sort of tried to wipe whatever blockchain initiatives, brush them all under the rug they had. But now it's sort of coming back with the nod to the blockchain industry by the ETF and things like that. And that's what I think a lot of people believe it is fueling this bull run, but also fueling the rise in activity from the institutional side and also just retail money in the space. And so coming back to BlackRock specifically, they started a 100 million USDC, so that's the equivalent, that's a stablecoin equivalent of dollars, fund on Ethereum. And so they seeded that fund with 100 million US dollars. And so and they named it the BUIDL fund. And so they're trying to capitalize on the misspelled meme that some of you may know about. So there's the HODL meme in Bitcoin, which is a misspelled version of hold that came from an old forum post. And so BlackRock is signaling that they are a builder in the blockchain space. That's sort of, and it actually stands for, I believe, BlackRock USD Institutional Digital Liquidity Fund or something like that, acronym wise. But really, what they're trying to
let me just stop you in case people are driving, just to make sure. So, folks, and this is simple stuff, Zuhair, but just to make sure we're not losing anybody. So, the Bitcoin enthusiasts, like their deal is, oh, you want to hold, and even if the price goes down, no, just stick to it, man. You got to put your faith into it. You got to look to the future. And so, and I think it was on a Reddit post a while ago. They meant to type in HOLD for hold, and they just did a typo and did HODL. So now HODL or HODL is like the catchphrase. And so you're saying for the BlackRock people, they wanted to kind of give a nod and a wink to that community. So their fund is spelled BUIDL instead of like the more normal build. But yet they did come up with an acronym to fit those letters.
Exactly. It's the BlackRock USD Institutional Digital Liquidity Fund, BUIDL. Okay. And actually that whole post initially was on the Bitcoin Talk forums, which was I believe the same forum that Satoshi initially formed his community on. So that is a very central meme to the blockchain sort of space. And then BUIDL was also a meme before BlackRock started this fund in more of the Ethereum circles and sort of the smart contract development space. And so it was sort of a nod to the original. But yeah, that's the history of the memeology there, if you want to call it that. So really what BlackRock has done is they've seeded a fund with stablecoins on Ethereum. And it's a big step for institutions, I would say, optically as well as perhaps practically, although there was nothing really stopping them from doing this like 4 years ago. It's really just they've finally taken a step to do something like this on a public blockchain, which they've been hesitant to do in the past. And for good reason, as you're about to find out.
Well, let me stop you. So just first principles here.
Yeah.
Someone might say, what do you mean they launched $100 million? Like, first of all, if it's on the Ethereum blockchain, doesn't it have to be in ETH? So what do you mean they're using different tokens? And then what does it mean to have a fund on a blockchain? Like, what does it even mean?
Right. Yeah, it's a good question. So on Ethereum and other smart contract compatible blockchains, and actually on Bitcoin, where recently you're seeing these digital representations of fiat currencies. So on Ethereum, you have tokens like USDC, which is the fund what the fund is denominated in, which is a parallel to the US dollar in fiat currencies, except in its tokenized format. And so the way that it functionally works is individuals or institutions will deposit money with Circle Corporation or the custodian of USDC, the issuer of USDC, and then Circle will issue USDC tokens that are fully backed by the USDC or by the dollars that they deposited initially onto the Ethereum blockchain in the form of an ERC20 token. So ERC20 is just a token standard. So there are multiple different tokens, as you know, on the Ethereum blockchain, in addition to ETH, which is the base layer token. And so USDC is one of those, and it represents a dollar's worth of value. And so when a institution wants to denominate in US dollars...
Can I stop you, Zuhair? Yeah. Economically, because we have overlaps in our audience. So for those who are interested in like money and banking from an economics perspective, particularly from the Austrian, so it sounds like what USDC does is the digital, blockchain analog of just more conventionally, like what happens if you want to open a checking account with a bank, you go and you might give them $100 bill and then, they credit your account, then you have like a debit card. And so now you can walk around town and spend your $100, but strictly speaking, when you go to the grocery store and slide your debit card, it's like you have a claim on that actual $100 bill, and then things happen digitally to be able to transfer that around. So here it's people have US dollars in more conventional forms, and then they hand that over to Circle, and then they give them things that are effectively claims on those dollars. And so long as the community trusts the redeemability of those, then now you can go out and spend dollars on blockchains.
Right, magic internet money.
Yeah,
big news. I mean, There's sort of like the fact that you're trusting a centralized corporation is one risk that I think institutions see in the structure you described. And actually, there's been attempts at algorithmic stablecoins that cut out the sort of centralized institution and instead use a stability algorithm mechanism to maintain their peg. Those have gone horribly wrong in the past. Terra Luna is one example that your audience may have heard of, and others like it. So really the only model that has worked for long periods of time in crypto, long periods of time is or blockchain. It's a few years, is the fully backed stable coins like USDC and USDT, although that is somewhat debatable for some people in terms of the backing. So that there's a lot of back and forth about that. But ultimately,
real fast, that's why this is so interesting to me as an Austrian economist, because that was one of the long-standing arguments we've always had is over fractional reserve banking, and to say in a more unregulated, laissez-faire environment without the central bank sort of acting as a lender of last resort, without FDIC, would the public want checking accounts that were basically fully backed by cash in the vault? In which case you couldn't earn interest on your checking account. In fact, you'd have to pay a fee to the bank. Otherwise, why are they maintaining ATMs and things like that? And you check processing services. Or would people be willing to have not 100% backing? So, the total amount of checking account balances is greater than the amount sitting in the vault. And that's why a bank run's possible. If everyone shows up to withdraw their checking account, the bank says, sorry, we don't have it. But then if you are willing to tolerate that, then the bank can afford to pay you interest because they lend out some of that money and they just, earn a spread and blah, blah, blah. So that was an interesting academic dispute. And so that's what's neat about looking at these stablecoin markets, is to see, what does the public, what do they want? Where, given that they want to, quote, hold cash, how do they want it to be backed up and so forth? So anyway, that's just kind of a neat economist angle to all this.
And another economic tidbit is that you don't get any yield on your USDC, even when interest rates are like 8%, like USD Circle will keep everything, right? And it's like there are alternatives cropping up, and actually the economic model for Sound Token will address some of this. But really the idea behind USDC is it gives you utility in a blockchain ecosystem where you don't have access to fiat. You have a programmatic form of US dollars that you can use to denominate your contracts in and whatever other activity you're doing on chain. And that's the utility. And in exchange for that, you're giving up all the potential interest you could be earning on the money, because Circle's earning it in the back end. And sort of that's their business model. And so coming back to the fund, so BlackRock specifically, so they denominate in this USDC asset because they're not crypto native, as you might say, because obviously they're a large institution. They're trying to dip their toes in. They're not trying to go 100% ETH allocation type of thing. So they seeded the fund with $100 million of USDC. The intention or the stated intention of the fund was relatively vague, but from what I gleaned, it was that they're trying to recreate sort of a money market type of structure on chain using whatever real world asset analogs there are on chain. So for example, they might deploy 10 million USDC into some yield bearing safe asset that's available on the Ethereum blockchain. And so this $100 million is available now to deploy within the Ethereum ecosystem into different smart contracts, into different yield-bearing assets and things like that. So that's the purpose of the capital. And then do you want to get to the drawbacks of doing it on a public blockchain?
Well, but right before we do that, just one more bit of just for the audience to understand, me too, to understand exactly what their fund is. So is it like that was already, some people had invested with BlackRock and then BlackRock just deployed their money, now it just sits there and it's on autopilot? Or like other people can get into that fund if they want to?
Yeah, so as far as I understand, the 100 mil was a fixed seed amount for the fund. And it may have been from their original reserves, or it could have been that they raised the fund specifically with third parties. The information that I could glean, it wasn't fully clear. But the end result is there's a sort of digital liquidity fund that they've established for institutions, really, institutional facing. And then that's really like, I think the signal is much more important because for them, it's a relatively small amount of money compared to their total balance sheet. I think what they're trying to signal is that institutions are ready to adopt blockchain rails, specifically public blockchain rails, for institutional finance. And so I think that's a more important message that came out, or the more important a motive behind this fund, as far as I can see. Because there are others like JP Morgan who are doing the Onyx project and other things like this. So nobody wants to be left behind in terms of adopting new tech, but they also have to consider the risks when there are a large institution that's very heavily regulated, et cetera. And so that's why it's taken so long to adopt, because the blockchain space is very Wild West in that regard.
Okay. Speaking of taking so long, I've teased the audience enough. I've made them wait almost 15 full minutes now. So can go ahead and give us the titillating details of some of the hijinks that people played, given that they have this thing now on a public blockchain.
Yeah, when this was announced, I was quite interested to see how long it would take. I actually had a bet. I called my brother and I was talking about this, and I said, hey, let's take bets as to how many days it'll take before this finally happens. And it was like, I think probably the day after they launched the fund, all this stuff came to fruition, because it's like, you can't stop it from happening on a public chain. And what I'm talking about is that people sent, there's multiple things. So one is that people sent sanctioned money into the BlackRock wallet address. And so what they did was there was a Tornado Cash mixer, which the OFAC had sanctioned. And so what happened was what does that mean? Just for people who don't know what the heck you're talking about. Can you unpack those terms? Right, yes. So Tornado Cash was another sort of big event in the last couple of years in the blockchain space. So the US government basically put on the sanctioned list, on the OFAC sanctioned list, this smart contract called Tornado Cash. And Tornado Cash is what you call a mixer. It's what you use to wash funds on the blockchain. And so privacy advocates will dispute that, and they will say that, well, it's something that you use to keep your balances private. Because remember, public blockchains, every transaction is fully public. And so whenever I transfer money to Bob, everyone can see what I'm doing. It's completely transparent, at least pseudonymous, because they can see my address, right? And if I have any linkage, any metadata associated with my address on any exchanges, then people can identify exactly who's sending money to who. And that's a privacy leak, right? And so privacy advocates will say
let me stop you there. So what the public blockchains show is it's a public ledger. That's the whole point, or that's one of the points. And so It's crystal clear for the rest of time, going back, backwards in time to the very first blocks being added to the chain, as to, tokens were moved from this address to that address. And then that got added. And so that's all sitting there. So it doesn't say Zuhayr Rashid sent 3 ETH to Robert Murphy. It says, this address sent 3 ETH to that address. Right. But your point is, over time, if the feds or whoever is investigating somebody, and they can just figure out, that address is tied to, from some other transaction, we realize that Robert Murphy is the guy controlling that one address, then that means going back to the whole ledger, that address is probably him doing all those things. And so then they can start doing, so that's what people do by saying it's not anonymous, but it's also not fully us. And so it's pseudonymous that I don't know what you gotta say. I don't know what the opposite of anonymous is, but pseudonymous means it's like partial, where it doesn't have your literal name, but it does have a unique signature tied to you. And so if they could somehow figure out just one of them who that guy is, then that they know all your dealings for that address. You could have multiple addresses you control.
Yeah, exactly. And so a lot of it is depends on heuristic analysis and things like that. But ultimately, the crux of it is that there is less privacy on a public blockchain than you may initially think if you're not familiar with the workings of a public blockchain. And so what people have created are things like mixers, like Tornado Cash, which allow people to intermingle all their funds, or whatever funds they deposit into this contract. And then the contract will disperse the funds in such a way that, using cryptography, modern cryptography, and what happens is, just to spare you the gory details, what happens is you can get your funds out on the other side, and the origination of those funds has been obfuscated. And so the individuals who receive the funds on the other side, you receive them on a fresh address, and then now the origin of the funds has been obfuscated, right? So privacy advocates love this. It's a great thing for them. From the perspective of regulators and anti-AML, KYC, and governmental actors, they see it as, okay, well, you're washing money and you're performing criminal activity. And so,
So can I stop you again?
yeah.
So for the listener, so the idea is, tell me if this is wrong, a bit of 30,000 foot level. So what the authority, the authorities are watching some guy and they figure out through forensic analysis and blah, 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 that, oh yeah, he's controlling, these 17 addresses are his. We know that. He probably has more, but we've pinned down that these 17. And so now if that guy wants to send money to some other nefarious character, if he's clever, he's going to know, oh, I might be monitored. And so I won't just directly send it, because then if they know my address, then they know that guy's address. So instead, what they can do is, what it looks like to the people looking at it is he sent his funds into the Tornado Cash, into the addresses that they can control on the receiving end, and then they mix it all up, and then maybe they break, his influx gets broken up into 1,000 different outputs going to other addresses, and since there's lots of people sending their money into Tornado Cash, and on the other end, lots of not money, but tokens are coming out the other end, getting blasted to all these other things, and from the outsider's point of view, they can't tie an input to an output, and so now, yes, there still are funds going to that other character that they think is dubious, but they can't really prove who sent it to them. And so that link gets broken by going through this mixer.
Right. No, exactly. And that's why it's called Tornado Cash, right? It's sort of aptly named for the function it performs. But obviously, it's a double-edged sword when it comes to, I guess, when it comes to the regulator's perspective, right? And so what happens with it is, actually, just that tiny extra bit of history, I think it was the first time in history, as far as I understand, that a developer was arrested for writing code that was basically not explicitly malicious. So it was seen as a very egregious free speech violation when he was arrested, and it was because he basically authored this protocol that was then seen to be used by criminals and people who wanted to obfuscate the source of their funds. And so there's a whole sort of rabbit hole we could go down there, but your viewers can look that up. It's quite interesting, the story around Tornado Cash. But the way it relates to the BlackRock fund is the so there were a couple of people, and so so Tornado Cash is sanctioned, that the wallet address is sanctioned. Sorry, the contract address is sanctioned by the U.S. government. And so what happened is, people sent funds from the mixer, from the Tornado Cash mixer, into the BlackRock public fund wallet address. And if you understand Ethereum, if you know anything about Ethereum, or any sort of public blockchain, you cannot block transfers or incoming transfers into any address. It just doesn't exist in the protocol at the protocol level. So it would be as if somebody knows your home address and somebody mails you dirty cash. You can't stop them from mailing you dirty cash, right? Or you take some rudimentary measures, but on chain, it's like, if somebody knows your blockchain address, you can't stop them from sending you things. And so people sent BlackRock 1 ETH worth of, so that was like $3,000 worth of tainted money. So tainted ETH from a Tornado Cash origination address. And
so again, just for an analogy, somebody robs a bank and the authorities know the serial numbers of all the cash that was stolen.
Right.
And so those criminals are sitting on it, and they know not to just go to a car dealership and try to give $3,000 or whatever, $10,000 in cash, because they know they're going to get caught. So they're being real surreptitious about, in small, or finding people that can, quote, launder the money and whatever. But then if there's some guy they don't like, they could mail him, an envelope full of, a few $100 bills of the stuff that the authorities know was from the stolen bank, and then maybe tip off the feds or something. And then they're going to say, hey, how come you're getting all this money? And you're saying you can't. He's like, what are you talking about? I have nothing to do with that. I can't stop someone from mailing me something. What do you mean? So, but it would look awkward for that guy to be getting mailed cash that the authorities know was from a bank robbery.
Well, not only awkward in this case, it's actually incriminating, because you actually, as a I believe U.S. or non-U.S. person, you're not allowed to own. It's not a question of whether you asked for it or you accepted it. You're not allowed to own tainted money. And actually, there was a whole celebrity dusting incident. Dusting means you're sending a bunch of small dollar denominated, or not dollar denominated, but small dollar transactions into different wallets. And so a lot of celebrity wallets that were publicly known got dusted using Tornado Cash tainted money after the event and the original event. And so all of them were technically criminals. And
Right.
it was quite funny because it's like, it's completely unenforceable to some degree, but also it's ridiculous that there's such a disconnect between the regulatory authorities and the way that the public blockchain technology is progressing and is built. And so it's like, there's a big disconnect there. It's become more apparent. I think people who are doing this kind of, it's sort of a satirical play. It is to highlight these issues. And so that Tornado Cash transaction into BlackRock's fund was one example of that. Additionally, so there's also not only from a incrimination perspective, but also from a vulgarity perspective. Because again, institutions are very corporate, they're very polished, etc. And so
Yep.
the blockchain space likes to really, really break that mold and try to troll people. And so what people did was, I'll let your viewers Google it, but there's an address with initial BDF.eth. I won't say the full thing, but BDF.eth sent a bunch of ETH into the BlackRock wallet, or I believe it was either ETH or NFTs with vulgar depictions of things. And so it's like all this stuff is going, and this actually happened with one of the card providers. I believe it was Visa or MasterCard when they came on chain initially as well, where people were sending pornographic NFTs into their wallet address. So whenever you open their wallet on OpenSea or NFT browser, you see all this stuff, and it's like this is like a PR nightmare for the institutions, and people relish in trolling the institutions that are doing this. And then can you
just unpack the actual mechanism? So is it because an NFT is a non-fungible token,
right?
And then just for people who don't who aren't in the trenches with this, what does that mean? That if I went and I wanted to look and see what the BlackRock fund held in terms of assets, all of a sudden I would see a pornographic image, or
right.
is that not quite it?
Yeah, and Bob, thanks for clarifying when I use acronyms. I've been in in this for so long, I don't realize when I'm using jargon. So really, what happens with an NFT transaction is you have the fund wallet address. Think about it as an account, right? An account that stores assets in it.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the assets is $100 million of USDC. Well, now anyone can deposit assets to this address, right? Not anyone can send it. Only BlackRock can send things out of the address. To receive items in the address, anyone on the entire Ethereum blockchain can send assets into this address if they know the address. Mm-hmm. It's a public address. And so people will send assets like NFTs, like Ethereum, tainted Ethereum, and other types of assets into this address. And then the way that you view the assets of a wallet address on chain is through these front-end explorers. So you can go to a block explorer, type in an address, and then you'll be able to see what that address holds. So you'll be able to see the NFTs it holds. You'll be able to see the coins it holds and tokens and things like that. And so that's really what people want to shock people that are going to the fund address and looking up their assets, really.
Okay, and so again, this is real elementary, but I just want to make sure it's clicking. So you might, in the regular corporate world with conventional assets, somebody, sits on a copier and photocopies his rear end and then mails that photo to Chase Manhattan or something, and the people there get it in the mail room, and they're like, and the public's not going to know about that, right? Because they're not going to broadcast, hey, someone mailed us a pornographic image, because their assets, back in the 30 years ago, were not publicly available, right? And so the public couldn't just see. Whereas the whole point of putting stuff on a blockchain, especially a public blockchain, is this is a public record. This is a ledger. Everyone can see it. Look at the transparency, and there's lots of advantages for doing that. Yep. But then the downside is, okay, so some joker wants to send a quote asset to that address, the protocol doesn't immediately reject it. Anybody can send something in there. And then while it's sitting there, the public who wants to look at the contents of this public, on this public ledger, that's why it's transparency. Well, then if somebody sends a thing in a non-fungible token, artists create images and sell it that way, and they do art. And so therefore, this has the capacity to show you an image if you have the right software to be able to view it. And there you go. So someone can exploit those capacities or those capabilities to do the kind of, prank that you're just talking about.
Exactly. Right. And so that's the downside for institutions and very, I guess, traditional entities to operating on a completely public and permissionless or very censorship resistant, it would be more accurate to say blockchain, right? Because it's very difficult to then, or impossible in a lot of cases, functionally impossible to roll back the chain or to do anything to mitigate these issues. And so because of that, the institutions will either have to sort of eat the fact that they're going to be trolled all the time on public chains, or they will have to understand that perhaps a different organization or a different sort of mechanism it is the right way to go when they're implementing blockchain technology, as our blockchain provider Provenance at Infineo has done, which is really...
Let me pump the brakes here again, and I hope this isn't too annoying to you. Probably the listeners like it.
This is great, Bob.
Yeah, so...
really good.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so let me just make sure we get... Because this is it. I mean, now that you're saying it, it's sort of obvious, but I had never really reflected on this. So the whole thing with the cryptography and solving the Byzantine generals problem and blah, the intellectual task or problem that Satoshi solved in his white paper that made Bitcoin possible was, we want to make sure, you start out with this ledger and different addresses control or contain, whatever verb you want to use, various amounts of the token. Let's say it's Satoshi's. And then the hard thing was, you want to make sure that a malicious actor can't make your address send tokens to his address against your will. So that the sending is the thing that you really want to control and make sure that only if there's a private key that's the digital signature and blah, 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 and trapdoor functions to make sure only the legitimate owner has the ability to tell the miners when you're adding another chain that, yes, I want the tokens at my address to be sent to this other address. And they can't leave my address unless I approved it. That's where all the cryptography and blah, blah, blah was pointed at. But on the other hand, nobody worried about, well, what if someone's trying to send me Bitcoins and I don't want them? If the whole thing was just to make sure the person sending it really meant to do that. And that wasn't that you somehow tricked it or, did fraud. But there was never any, the protocol is not capable of shielding you from unwanted incoming Bitcoins. Right? Is that correct? Okay.
No, that's exactly right. And then I would analogize it to early adoption of internet technologies, such as, for example, CSS or JavaScript. And these things that built the early internet, that are sort of make up some of the infrastructure of the internet, or the things that you interact with on a day-to-day basis, are not optimal. They were the first things that worked. And so that's actually, I think, been a recurring trend throughout history. When infrastructure is built, it's what is good enough to take root and then basically consume the world. That will win over something that is actually theoretically optimal for the problem set. And so it's really a question of marketing and adoption and things like that versus the product quality. And so this translates into, Bitcoin has problems. It's amazing how well structured it is for a first shot at a blockchain. And Satoshi did a really great job, but it has its issues with, for example, tail emission and other things like that. And these are hotly debated topics. But ultimately, what is the case is that blockchains are, as they stand, if you look at it objectively, they're not optimal for every single use case that you might want to apply them to. They're optimal for almost none, but they're good for many, and they're very bad for many others. And so if your use case has certain characteristics, well, then a iteration upon the technology, just like an iteration on JavaScript, such as React and other frameworks, I'm not going to go into depth, but basically JavaScript is here, and then there's other things built on top of it that make it more usable for different use cases. And so I think in a similar way, you have the blockchain technology, which was originally formulated by Satoshi, or really what got adoption. But then you have things that have been built atop of that original technological foundation that can serve different needs. And I think that's really what you're seeing with a bunch of different networks that are available now, layer 1s, layer 2s, and even layer 3s. Not to say that all of them are valid use cases for anything, really. There's a long tail of very, very bad chains that just exist to capitalize on the hype of blockchain. But there are a good number of diverse chains that serve different use cases. And I think that what I was saying earlier about Provenance, specifically, Provenance serves the financial asset infrastructure use case. They're a semi-permissioned blockchain. So they're public technically, but the nodes have to valid. I'm going into jargon, but
it's okay. We had Josh Maddox on, so this is going to be for the diehard listeners of this podcast. Some of this is going to be repetition. So I'll let you speak, and then I'll do my standard shtick of paraphrasing back to you what you said. But
sure.
But go ahead. I'm saying this is not the first time they've heard about a semi.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So it's sort of an iteration on the public model where you have a blockchain that can capture a lot of the efficiencies and the good qualities of public chains, but also mitigate some of the downsides of having just pure public permissionless access to the chain in terms of launching contracts and things like that on it. And you can sort of analogize it to a street or a house that's completely open for people to come in and out versus something that, yes, you can have people come in and out, but there's basic checks that you have to do before. So are they a part of my family? Are they my friends? If so, then you can come in and out. And so the house will be vandalized and things like that. So I think it's one analogy you could give. There are many others, but I think Provenance is trying to implement a semi-permissioned version of blockchain. And I think that's a fit for certain use cases. So for example, financial asset digitization, like we're trying to do at Infineo. And then public chains might be suited for other use cases. But I don't think there's a hard and fast rule as to what is better. I just think there are things that are better for certain use cases.
The analogy, it wasn't with Josh Maddox, it was with somebody else, and the name is escaping me at the moment, where when he was explaining that spectrum between like a purely internal chain, which is really just kind of like a database, that like one institution controls the ledger, which is, they say, SQL or something, versus, Bitcoin, which is the most famous and ubiquitous, completely public chain. And then the intermediaries of the, somewhat permissioned, where there's like certain validators who have the ability. And the analogy I had used for that one was to say, okay, so it's somewhat like the in-between is more like the completely trust-based model is I go into, like if it's cattle or something, and I go and deposit my cattle with this rancher over here, and he just gives me a receipt, like a piece of paper, say, yep, he dropped off, 3 heads of cattle here. And if he mismarks it on his books or they're crooks, and I show up with the receipt, they might say, what are you talking about? We don't have it. So I'm kind of trusting them to manage it. Whereas the semi one is more like in the middle of the town square, there's like a big fenced off area, and all the big ranchers, like 10 of them are there, and they all are looking over each, the cattle coming and going and sort of blessing the transactions or not. And so there it's not like open to the whole world, but now it would have to be like those 10 guys would all have to be in on it if they wanted to systematically screw people over. And so you hope that, there's more accountability or just minimization of an honest mistake on any one part. So
yeah.
Can I ask you, just going, so I think you've done a good job explaining to the listeners the pros and cons and maybe why. Well, we did see that after the stuff that happened with BlackRock and that news broke about, look what happened. Some of the people that we know in our neck of the woods were saying, yep, see, we told you so. This is why, you want to use something like a Provenance that's dedicated to financial transactions. So, but for right now, given that BlackRock is where it is, can they, just so the listeners understand, like I'm assuming as soon as it gets flagged and they're aware that, there's a pornographic NFT that we just got, they can just send that somewhere else out of the fund, right? Because if it's sent to them, now they own it. Can't they just move it somewhere else?
Yeah, they could. It costs them money every time. So
okay, but still, like in terms of, you're probably not going to win an arms race with BlackRock to try to bankrupt them if you're just some random troll.
True, but you could go quite a long way when it's crowdfunded trolling.
I do want to come to that in a minute to say why is this in anybody's interest? Okay, but strictly speaking, they could do that.
They're free to send it, whatever they want.
To get it out of there, because now if you're giving it to them, now they technically own it and they can use their private keys to sign the transaction to move it to somewhere else that's not, that the public doesn't know. Oh, if you want to go see what's in the BlackRock $100 million fund, you go to these addresses and see what's there. They can move it out of there. And then likewise with the tainted stuff coming from the Tornado Cash, can they show the authorities and say, we've built a protocol that when those, we can't literally stop them at the front door. Like they come into our possession, but we immediately shunt them off over to this thing over here in a segregated thing that we don't, it just sits there and we don't have anything to do with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but you could make maybe a good faith case for that. Technically, they'd still be violating the law as far as I understand, but they could make a good faith case and maybe it wouldn't be prosecuted. It's like maybe it wouldn't be enforced, right? I highly doubt it'll be enforced, but yeah, it's sort of, there are ways to sort of soft mitigate these types of things, but it's never going to be, sufficient, I think, on a public chain if you're trying to be completely like like for example, a lot of the front end explorers will hide a lot of the spam that comes in. So you might have 1,000 spam NFTs in your address, and it just doesn't show on a lot of the explorers that you look at, although it's still there on the chain. And so there's things like that you could do. So BlackRock could build their own front end, for example, to show what assets are on their wallet, and they could exclude all of the stuff they don't want people to see and say, hey, this is the source of truth. Although on the underlying chain, there's still, the assets are still there. So there's different mitigation steps you can try and do, but ultimately the chain is the chain, and the infrastructure works the way it does, right?
Okay, so I know I look at the clock here. We'll wrap up very soon. Can you? So what is the motivation of this? Like, is it purely just trolls thinking it's funny, or is it also possible that, I mean, I know you don't know, but can you speculate, or I don't know what the word on the street is? Is it possible that like other people who don't like the BlackRock prod, like their competitors, maybe who are betting on something else, like they could do this to sabotage what they're trying to do? And so in which case there would be deep pockets behind it. And maybe, somebody would be willing to pay whatever, $500,000 over the next 12 months to really make people think BlackRock's experiment was a failure.
Yeah, I mean, I doubt that there was too much malice behind it. Personally, just based on like BDF.eth, you look up what that means. He's probably not a competitor. It's really probably just a troll, I would say. Like,
that's the one that was like a reference to male anatomy. That's maybe as far as we'll take it. Okay.
Yeah. So I think really what it is people like to stick it to the man, especially blockchain people, especially people who are bit. And then you got to understand, like, a lot of people in the blockchain space have been sidelined and they feel very much sidelined by TradFi. They feel there's a lot of resentment there, which is understandable. And also from like libertarian types who value complete absolute free speech. Like, I think there's a lot of people like that in the space. And I really see where they're coming from. And so they're trying to poke a bit of fun, but also make a point and say, hey, this is our domain, not yours.
Okay.
And you're coming
in your sandbox. If you come in here, we're going to start throwing mud at you. Okay.
Yeah, that's my theory. I mean, there's a lot of actors that could have potentially done it, but it's such a small, relatively, I think it's such a small thing that, like, for example, you see a lot of the big crypto hacks done by North Korean actors and other state actors. I think those things are much more impactful, and those would be funded by state actors. But these are like small troll type of things, but they do damage the brand in some way, if you think about it from that perspective. So it could be anybody, but I really think it's probably mostly trolls.
Okay. Can I ask you one more question? You got time?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We'll wrap up. So I've been alluding to this in a lot of the previous discussions too. A standard question I ask is, hey, here's what the Bitcoin maxis and how they look at this stuff. And then now, since if I'm interviewing somebody who is involved in tokenization of real world assets. So what's interesting is you, if I understand correctly, used to be a Bitcoin maxi, right?
Right.
Your younger version of yourself. So can you explain maybe if you had to give the quick version to those out there who to say, hey, I used to be one of you, and now I've moved in my thinking. Can you just explain from a sympathetic perspective, because where they're coming from?
Yeah, I think my without getting too high level, my philosophy and my view on the world, I'm a realist in a lot of ways. And so for me, I used to be much more dogmatic in my earlier years about just things. And I used to be much more sort of gung-ho about certain ideas. I realized that a lot of the time, the extremes of any issue are, and this is not always the case, I don't think, but most of the time, anecdotally, the extremes of any issue have always tended to be wrong or sort of misguided or sort of missing the mark in my experience. And so I tried to be more of a centrist in most things. And so when I was a Bitcoin maximalist, it was because I was introduced to Bitcoin by friends of mine who basically, and for good reason, there were a lot of scams out there at the time because of the hype around the new tech. And so for good reason, there was sort of a protective or immune response from the Bitcoin community, as a lot of people like to say, to protect the Bitcoin blockchain from these scams and protect it from associations with these scams that could ultimately bring the project down. And so for that reason, I think there was a good reason for people to be skeptical of a lot of other projects back then. And that's sort of where I was coming from, where Bitcoin was really the most legitimate, the most virtuous project, because the founder just sort of donated this fabulous technology to the world and left, didn't take any financial gain. The story was great. And I think it still is. The only thing I see is you can only, so out of like 10,000 different layer one chains, 9,990 might be terrible in terms of for any use case. But there is a like if you think about it from a perspective of, okay, there's been a lot of development in the space. There must be some things that can be applied, use cases that can be serviced by other chains that are more Turing complete programmatically than Bitcoin. And by Turing complete, I mean you're able to do more programmatic stuff on these other chains than you can on Bitcoin, at least at the moment. And so I think that it's just obvious that there are other chains that might be better for certain use cases than Bitcoin is, versus Bitcoin might be the best chain for hard money, right? And that's it, or the best chain for XYZ use case. But there might be another chain that uses a similar technology and provides a similar solution for a different use case. And it's just, it's not in competition with Bitcoin. And I think a lot of the time when people get really fired up about, well, no, your chain is it becomes sort of like a very, very dogmatic discussion. And people aren't looking objectively at, okay, what does this chain provide? Maybe it's more centralized, maybe there are less nodes, but maybe that's fine for the use case that it's purporting to service, right? Maybe it doesn't need to be super hard money. And then this chain has this going for it, and it can service this use case, and Bitcoin can stay being the king of hard money. And so that's how I sort of came to my more centrist position on chain diversity over time. I still am a hardcore Bitcoiner. I still believe in Bitcoin's long-term potential over most other chains. I think that it's a great use case for hard money that has not existed before. And I think that I don't think it's mutually exclusive with other chain use cases. That's my position right now. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, that dovetails with my, just like a silly analogy that they come up with the printing press and they start making the Bible with the, mass producing the Bible, and that's great. But if people said, no, that's the only thing the printing press is good for, that would be kind of crazy. And so likewise, yeah, maybe it's going to be that the blockchain 100 years from now, looking back, people are still going to say the single most important thing it did was make, Bitcoin available to humanity.
Right.
That I'm open to that being the case, but it would seem kind of crazy to me to think that that technology is not going to have other applications. And like you say, maybe they won't be as good in certain dimensions as Bitcoin is for what Bitcoin does. But some of these claims I see when if I go on social media and talk about some of the things we're doing with tokenization of real world assets, and I'll get a few people just trying to blow me up like, no, if it's not Bitcoin, then just use a database. Otherwise, you either are an idiot or a grifter, and it's like, wait a minute, well, I could be both, I could be both or neither. Yeah. So
this exists in probably every single industry field that I've ever come across personally. And depending on how, I guess, political in nature that the field can get, it becomes more charged on either end. AI is the same. So like people might say, well, AI, and people are getting up in arms about AI replacing jobs and things like that, but AI can also cure cancer potentially, right? And then in the future, and
throw all those cancer doctors out of work,
right? Yeah. So there's two sides to everything. I think there's value in keeping an open mind, but as a quote I've heard a few times, I think it's also good to not have your mind so open that your brain falls out. So I think there's a balance between the two, and I think it's just good to keep an open mind about things so that you can assimilate new information as it comes along and just progress in a person's intellectual journey just as you grow. But obviously, you need to have some level of guardrails. And I think when it goes to the extreme of either of those two things, I think you regress more than you progress over time. And I like to sort of hang in the balance.
Okay, well, that's a great place to wrap up. So thank you, folks. We've been talking with the Chief Technology Officer here at Infineo. I just like to showcase the depth of our bench just to show that why I'm so excited about the things we're doing, because our team here really knows what they're talking about. So thanks, Zuhair, for your time and your insights.
Yeah, you're no lightweight either, Bob. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And remember, keep an open mind, but not too open. And we'll catch you next time.
This concludes another episode of InFi, the Future of Finance, with Dr. Robert Murphy. The information provided is for educational purposes and does not constitute financial advice. Consult with qualified professionals before making any financial or investment decisions. For more information on the host and for previous episodes, visit infi, thefutureoffinance.io. Thanks for listening.